is about scale. And we're going to talk about scale in an hour. And I'm very, very pleased to have the most amazing experts on scale, on scaling hydrogen around on this panel. Dr. Sunita Satyapal, who coined the word hydrogen at scale 3 years ago. We were together in Washington, D.C. The U.S. government was already saying that hydrogen should be at scale, and and she's been instrumental in shaping the policy of the U.S. government in the last few years, and she'll tell us about what this means today, where we stand. Noé van Hulst has also been instrumental on the scaling in his home country of the Netherlands, where he formerly was the envoy for the Dutch government, and now heads the International Partnership for Hydrogen Fuel Cells in the Economy. The scaling issue in the Netherlands is something very interesting, because the Netherlands is not a very big country, but it's connected to the world, and it thinks global, it thinks big by definition. So Noé will tell us how scale makes up. And then I'll turn now to, Jorgo, to the king of scale. Because Jorgo is not just talking about scale, he's making scale happen. As Secretary General of of Hydrogen Europe, he's behind, I can tell that, the incredible European policies that we've seen emerging over the last 12 months. And scale is what you're developing and what you're doing. And I think our audience will be very interested to see how it is shaping from Europe, and with all these tools that are there in Europe to precisely scale up. I'll just say a few words before that about what are we talking about? What is scale? I'll give you two approaches to it. One is the scale of the thing that we need to solve. That thing is climate change. That thing is replacing, I'm going to be very frank, fossil fuels, because that's what climate change is about. It's carbon emissions, and carbon emissions is fossil fuels. It's the equivalent, and they're both equivalent. Now, how do you do that? If you want to do it at scale, I'm going to put a very simple number. It's 1 billion tons of hydrogen. I'm not going to put a time behind that. Let's not argue about timing. But if you want to have a dent, I'm talking about the dent in fossil fuel consumption. That's what we need to do, 1 billion tons of hydrogen, of green hydrogen production. That is the scale of the thing that we need to achieve if we want, there again, to have an impact on the issue we're supposed to solve, which is climate change. Now, scale can be approached as well in another matter, which is industrial scale, because scale means cost and cost means scale. And in this case, I'd like to mention not hydrogen or electrolyzers, which are the key component, and they're emerging gigafactories that need to help us there, but another industry which has scaled up. 15 years ago, when I started working in the solar industry, the solar industry was basically a 1 gigawatt per annum industry. That was 15 years ago. This year, it's going to be a 200 gigawatts per annum industry, so times 200 in 15 years. But it's not just the beginning. And I'd like to share a discussion I had with a Chinese company, which, by the way, Chinese players in solar, which today is worth, by the way, $60 billion, is worth nearly as much as BP right now. Company is called Longi Solar. Everyone knows Longi Solar, obviously, I'm sure. Well, Longi Solar today has 50 gigawatts per annum cell module capacity, and aims at multiplying that by a factor of up to 10 in the next 5 years. So what we are seeing on the solar side, which, by the way, is totally linked to what we want to achieve on the green hydrogen side, is an industry that is moving to a 1 terawatt per annum volumes just around the corner. So the message here is not, let's not be timid. Let's be confident. Let's scale up. Why? Because cost means scale, and scale means cost. That's the lesson of solar, that has reduced its cost by 96% over the period of those 15 years. Whether we will achieve that with hydrogen remains to be seen. But what is certain is that scaling up is the key to volumes and to costs, and costs are the key to scale. And that's the thing. So now, obviously, in order to solve this chicken and egg situation, because that's what we're talking about, how you ramp up things very fast, we have immense challenges, value chain challenges, how you engineer the upstream, the midstream, the downstream, how you help those bottlenecks being solved, bottlenecks being, for instance, electrolyzer manufacturing, being transmission and storage of hydrogen, being the conversion of many fossil fuel-based activities in industry and energy to hydrogen. So we have tons of bottlenecks. The good news, however, and I'm very happy that we have such a big audience, and I'm sure there are lots of people from the investor community. And what we know for sure today is that hydrogen is not just hot or a hype. It is today something that is attracting tons of investments all across the value chain. And I have a very strong message to you, the audience, especially the audience that is in the finance business. We need you, and we're going to provide you with projects. So I'd like first to start with Jorgo. Jorgo, hydrogen, we were just mentioning that, discussing that a minute ago. Hydrogen was a sideshow, even though when we organized this, when Sunita organized this amazing event in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago, it was a sideshow. No, you had to be visionary like Sunita to talk about hydrogen at scale. People were saying, hey, this is a sideshow. And you've seen the hydrogen as a tiny thing, pilot project driven things. What happened in the last 12 months? And tell us about, and I'm going to be teasing you, you have been instrumental in bringing together a plan for Europe, which says 1 million tons of green hydrogen or hydrogen by 2024, 10 million tons by 2030. My question is, does that mean 100 million tons by 2036? Let's keep the curve going on. What's your analysis of what happened over the last 12 months and what is ahead of us and how we can solve all the challenges that I briefly mentioned?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to talk a little about what happened and what can happen. And great to see all three of you. We know each other, and I think you are all instrumental in bringing that hydrogen economy to scale. Second, I would like to apologize that I can only stay for the first 20 minutes of this talk. I'm super sorry, but that's part of the job to bring it to scale. And what happened? I think we were, and you are totally right, saying it was a science fiction thing. And I think it was the IPHE that was, invented in Washington. So Sunita and her predecessors were quite instrumental in doing it when there was this first hype thing in the 2000s, early 2000s. And it was very, very good to have this starting point at that, because a hype has always 5 cycles. Hype, the first cycle is, it rises to an expectation, but then it goes down because the expectation is not matched, and in our case, was not matched. And then it's hard to come back. You have then this valley of disillusionment where you need to go through. And we are now at the 4th phase. We are at the phase of climbing, so to say, back to reality. And the 5th phase, and we are about to reach that, is the plateau of productivity. And we are going to get there. However, in order to get there, we need a program, we need projects. And now the thing that made us accelerate the pace was definitely also the European Green Deal. So the climate crisis, the Paris Agreement, and the European Green Deal. And I have to say, the pandemic was also a catalyst. Why? Because when the pandemic broke out, it was Noel van Hulst and his IEA, because he's quite active in the IEA, coming up with the figures of the energy demand drop. So it really fundamentally dropped all over the globe, except in one case, and that was renewables. Only in the renewable field, the energy demand went up, which is great, because it is for us a very good hook to say, hey, more renewables out of fossil needs more fight of intermittency, so more storage, and hydrogen was a buzzword, a keyword to overcome this. And we were very lucky. You mentioned already the important role of the Netherlands. The Dutch commissioner, the European Commission, the executive vice president, Mr. Timmermans, he believed very much in that technology as one central pillar of the European Green Deal. And that was maybe the most important thing, to bring things together, to bring them to the knowledge, and to make a strategy out of it. So within 3 months, this idea became a strategy of the European Commission and of the European Union in the meanwhile, with this 1 million ton as a target for 24, or 6 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity in Europe. Now, let me outline a little bit how we are going to get there, because it's good to have the strategy. It has been underpinned now. It has been underlined by the heads of state and governments in this December summit, 14 pages as a conclusion of the heads of state and government to say, this is a good strategy, go. And now we are in the situation, and I would look at Sunita now, who will become the hydrogen champion on a global scale? I think the race is on. The race so far was China or Europe, and now with Joe Biden, and I'm happy to say so. I remember the last conversation we had, Sunita, that was under more difficult conditions. We are happy that the race is on, and the US is part of it now. And this is good, because in order to come to scale, sometimes you need that competition for more competitiveness. And here I come with a plan. The plan is very simple. The plan is that in this European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, which is basically a tool that helps to create what? To create a project of pipelines. I could also say of archetypes of projects that can be imitated, that at the same time bring scale, and that at the same time are a quality seal for further investment or for further funding all over the globe. So if this project would work in Europe by sector coupling, by hydrogen renewables, as we call them, so hydrogen that stems directly from renewable sources, this might be a blueprint to be copied all over the globe. And our plan is to this year to engineer the projects, at the same time to loosen, to relax the state aid rules. Why? Because it's super important to bring money, to bring funding into that systemic change. It's a systemic, it's a tectonic change, and that costs money. We have at the same time this recovery and resilience plans of the member states, 750 billion euro for the next 10 years. And that's what we're doing now. We are trying to bring good projects to the eyes and the desks of the funding institutions and the member states, and then to establish something like a quality seal with these projects that we are doing here for 3 years. So from 22 to 25, we want to ramp up, so to say, the different projects, including everything, low-hanging fruit being green hydrogen for industrial applications, chemical industry, petrochemical industry, as a low-hanging fruit, as a first step, direct client, but at the same time to ramp up everything. As of 25, market conditions. What do I want to say? It's 3 years of demonstrators, pilots, in order to bring down also the price, and only then start with market mechanisms from a lower level of pricing, not to duplicate or to replicate the mistakes we have done in renewable electricity, where the price is still super high because of the feed-in tariffs.
Thank you.
I don't want to monopolize. I just wanted to explain these are the plans we have, and we believe that we are very confident that it's started already well, that this will work.
Thank you. Just a last question before you have to go. I understand you have to go, Yorgo. That was last week. One of the star of the European hydrogen scene, Nel, this electrolyzer company that is planning on gigafactories, made a very strong announcement for 2025. They're saying $1.5 per kilogram is our target by 2025 as an essential part. Do you think What do you think about this this announcement? What do you think about European industry focusing on achieving these kind of numbers? And how do you think that can be done? Is it scale? Is it other things that can help achieve those numbers?
Well, first of all, it's of course the cost of renewable energy. And if we achieve to bring these costs down, and you know, we have achieved quite low production cost of renewable energy. That is the first precondition. And you mentioned solar. In the solar fields, sun-rich fields of Southern Europe or of Northern Africa, this might be possible. And I believe that Nel is right. If we fulfill this plan of the 1 million ton of renewable hydrogen, renewably produced hydrogen, and the 6 gigawatt, I think it's doable. It's between 1.5 and 2, but it is absolutely doable. But we need to start, and also the conditions for hydrogen need to be looked upon generally. Maybe some people might not like what I say now, but we need to be technology neutral, because if we want to decarbonize fast, we need also to take technologies into account that we have at our hands now. I want to avoid lock-in effects, no doubt about it. But if you just achieve 60% of decarbonization with, for instance, CCS technology, then this should not be given a long-term perspective. Long-term perspective only for technologies that achieve more than 90% of decarbonization. So renewables first, but also pyrolysis might there play a role. And there, if we manage to get, so to say, to a technology neutral approach, which avoids to make some mistakes I mentioned in the electricity field, just to mention one term or one figure. In Germany, the last year they paid 32 billion for for grid balancing and for curtailment. 32 billion. This is not something we want to see here, because then the price for hydrogen would stay forever high. No, that is why we need to avoid this by focusing only on one technology. At the same time, we should focus our efforts, of course, on renewable. I said already, hydrogen renewables as the long-term goal, without having all the other technologies put aside. Why? Because it's in the end the volume of the overall hydrogen market which will bring the prices down, and by that I think we can achieve this. Nel, of course, is a superstar. They are concentrating on electrolyzers, and this is the most promising thing to do. But we will have in the long run also other technologies that might play a role. Thank you. Great,
thank you, Jorgo. Sunita, when people think about scale, they think about the U.S. I don't know why, because maybe that's that's been in the DNA of the U.S. for at least 200 years. I wrote a book on hydrogen. One of the things that I specifically looked at was shale gas. I know that it's not very popular with most of our audience here, but shale gas is interesting because that's an example of scale. Few people fully realize that just in over a decade, the US grew by a Saudi Arabia in oil, from 5 million barrels per day to 13 million barrels per day earlier last year. And roughly, you could argue a Russia in natural gas. That happened in just over a decade. Talking about scale, $1.5 trillion invested, entrepreneurs, Wall Street, honestly, government involved, infrastructures deployed. That's an example. My question to you would be, do you think hydrogen is the new shale? And do you think the US has the potential, the technology players? We've seen the bright stars like Plug Power, very, very successful in the stock market recently. More companies getting involved in those things, many initiatives being taken across the US. Do you think the US is in a position to take a, who knows, leadership race, role in that race to scale hydrogen? And also tell us about what has happened over the last few years, because people need to understand how we came here, but most importantly, obviously, where we are headed from now on this scaling issue.
Great. Well, thank you, Thierry. And first of all, thank you as well for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with this prestigious group. And I am, as was already mentioned, we have a new administration. They're all just, starting to come in terms of the leadership. So I'm obviously speaking in terms of my role as the director of the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office within U.S. Department of Energy. But I've been here for many years, as you mentioned, almost 2 decades. And in the private sector before that, working in large corporation, hydrogen, fuel cells, and so many, many years of in-depth knowledge. And so I also agree with Jorgo and all of us, the hype cycle. So we have to be really, really careful now and very strategic. It's great to see all of the plans, but like everyone's saying, we have to deliver. So, I think these concrete projects, getting to cost. So in the US, in terms of scale, we have about 10 million metric tons per year that we produce, almost a seventh of the global supply. And starting to look very strategically, again, we have an all of the above portfolio. Hydrogen is one piece of that portfolio, but I like to use the term enabler. So again, it's not either or hydrogen. It's an enabler. It enables renewables, long duration storage, the steel industry, really hard to decarbonize sectors, the heavy duty transport. And so again, I think not pigeonholing hydrogen, but how it raises the tide so all the ships go up. Because again, we're going to get to those decarbonization goals. We have to, recognize that. And so in terms of scale, definitely, Thierry, there's a lot of experience there in last 10 years in the US. And starting to look at regions, because again, cost is so critical. And if we're really going to make this succeed, it has to be market driven, sustainable, competitive from a cost perspective. And so our strategy has been, we still need R&D. We've actually, reduced costs, over 90% just from, government funding, obviously industry funding, globally as well. But we need both scale, but still continue the R&D to ramp down costs. And then what's really important is, and it's great to see all these strategic plans and so forth, but really it's the implementation of those plans. And so both the strategy and the tactical plans, so for instance, the cluster concept, regions, how do we scale up production, but then also end use with real, off-takers, again, sustainable, market-driven, and then that whole supply chain production. We talk a lot about just the hydrogen cost, but you still need the transport, the delivery, the dispensing, the storage. So, it's that whole ecosystem, and how do we, really strategically get to that point that's really sustainable. So we have a lot of activities here. I have a lot of thoughts. I'll pause there, but again, it's great to be here and look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you, Sunita. Sunita mentioned projects because after all, scaling is a great concept, but it is a bit empty until we do projects. What is interesting with the Netherlands is that you haven't come up with actually, I would say maybe not the boldest policy, no offense to the Dutch government, but what you have come up with is actual projects. And there are many of them, and they're pretty much at scale. Maybe can you shed some light about what has been the driving vision? And by the way, you've been involved in this industry for very long, but we cannot just talk about history. It's interesting but it's also interesting to know how we got there. But I'd like you maybe to focus on those exemplary projects that are being developed right now in the Netherlands at various levels of the value chain, and what they say about this hydrogen at scale.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Thierry. And like Jorgo and Sunita, it's a pleasure to be here on this panel. And I very much like your focus, Thierry, how you started on indeed how important this scale is, because that's exactly the phase where we're at. We really need to make this happen in the next 10 years. So talking from my previous experience in the Dutch government, we really started looking extremely seriously at hydrogen because for the reasons that Sunita mentioned, it's unimaginable to decarbonize completely, to have net zero emissions in 2050 for industry, for heavy duty transportation and for seasonal storage without huge amounts of clean hydrogen. So that's where you see, you know, we have to scale up. And then we had, of course, a couple of things coming together in the Netherlands. Number one, a tremendously good gas infrastructure, which we discovered can be completely repurposed for transportation, long distance transportation of hydrogen with only very limited cost. And this is not only true, of course, in the Netherlands, but this is true all over Europe and all over the world where you have a gas pipeline system. Of course, circumstances are different in different areas, but for the Netherlands, for sure, very modest costs. And I think it's true for the rest of Europe as well. And also, you know, it's not only the cost issue, but it's also, since the Netherlands is phasing out gas production very rapidly, our own gas production, we have huge capacity of pipelines in the Netherlands becoming available. So you're talking about gigawatt scale of transportation capacity for not only the Netherlands, but also for Germany, for Belgium, for northern France, that we can transport once we have, of course, the production of the green hydrogen. And there you come to the scale of the production. So the transportation is not going to be an issue. It's available. We have to make the adjustments, obviously. Find the production of green hydrogen at scale, as you say. Well, there you have a huge potential of wind offshore for the Netherlands and also another number of other countries in the North Sea. So you have a very concrete project that I want to mention here for Europe is North H2, which is a international consortium already with Shell, Gasunie, RWE, Equinor are now part of that, and they are eyeballing 10 gigawatt of green hydrogen production in fact, in 2030. So it's starting with 1 gigawatt in 2027 and then going to 4 gigawatt in 2030, which will become available. And that means if you deliver that 4 gigawatt in 2030 means 10% of Yorgo's target for the European Union, within the European Union. It means 50% of the target for the Netherlands, 50% of the target for Germany, the national target. So we have to focus. That's what my plea has been for some time. And I want to repeat it here, Thierry. Yorgo knows this very well. Let's focus on a number of really big, huge flagship projects that can deliver this scale that we are talking about. Because yes, we have to make, I mean, the smaller scale projects are also important. I'm not denying that, but I'm just saying, give a special focus to the big projects that can start to deliver the really gigawatt scale in 2030 that we need together. And I think if the national governments, if the private sector, which is able and ready to invest in that, provided that the governments and the European Union, you know, takes care of the regulatory barriers that are still there, takes care of course, also some financial support, state aid rules, etc. We can make this happen. Last but not least, maybe not to be too long, Thierry, the Netherlands is also, of course, a country where has big harbors. So we have the harbor of Rotterdam, which is now delivering, and you are rightly pointing, we have to replace fossil fuels. So the Rotterdam harbor has actually as the big target, you know, now transporting all that fossil fuels. They want to replace it by hydrogen and other things. So they want to become a big import hub for the rest of Europe, not only the Netherlands, but also for Germany, to have, you know, clean hydrogen coming from the rest of the world, from Australia, from the Middle East, from Chile, wherever it comes from, to customers in Europe. So in that way, we can make, of course, a global trade system work, or the Netherlands can be instrumental in that. And for that, of course, we need strong international cooperation. We need certification schemes, clear definitions on what is clean hydrogen, what is the carbon footprint, and IPHEs and others are working on this with other countries.
Thank you, Noé. If Yorgo was still there, I would have questioned him on the infrastructure portion of what you just mentioned, because if we think scale, and I'll just mention it, I know what Yogo thinks, I'm not going to speak on his behalf, but if we think scale, we mean scale in production, upstream. Let's talk like oil and gas. Upstream, you need big production, whether that's from wind, onshore wind, offshore wind, say, if we're talking about Europe, it's Northern Europe. If we're talking about solar, that's the Mediterranean, both Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. And obviously, it's not enough to have those gigantic renewable energy production areas and potential as well electrolysis plants or other technologies, as Jorgo mentioned. You need to bring the stuff either through pipes or through ships. So, and there again, if you think about what happened in the last 100 years, what made the oil and gas industry possible were certainly the people who were drilling. But remember, you know, Standard Oil and was a midstream company. They took oils in barrels and bring from Pennsylvania to New York City. That's what it started in the 1860s. And what we need, and I will be interested to maybe to have a view on your thing. How do you view this ramping up of infrastructures in Europe and other on the midstream side? Because if we're just saying, hey, it's a concept, it's nice. The trading aspect that you're mentioning goes hand in hand with that, because midstream and trading are actually two sides of the same coin. Where do you see this infrastructure development coming from? And obviously, I'd call that probably an emergency. Where is regulation? That's something, by the way, for government as well to have some thoughts about.
Yeah. No, Thierry, you're completely right. So I see it all happening at the same time. And this is part of the challenge that we have, I think, in not only in Europe, but the rest of the world, that you're talking about entirely new value chains that you have to build. So those projects, and I mentioned North H2, but there are more, they try really to connect everything. So from the production side, the production of hydrogen, the transportation, the storage, and the industrial offtake. And you need to make this whole system, you need to make that work. So I think the good news here is really that despite the pandemic, despite the crisis, you see the big companies, including the Shells and the BPs of this world, really reallocating their investment flows to take this into account and to start investing big time. At the same time, you see the utilities coming. So you see also the Ørsteds of this world, the RWEs that are discovering that yes, you can produce a lot of wind offshore, but at a certain moment, you know, you're done with greening your electricity production in certain countries in Europe and also elsewhere in the world. So the new sources of demand for big electricity producers are green hydrogen. So I think the challenge is going to be how to build it all at the same, scale it up all at the same time. I think it can be done if we take a holistic approach where you have these projects along the value chain and you try to facilitate all of them together in private-public partnership. And you yourself, I know you are active in that area. So I think we need to bring it, and we need a bit in Europe. I'm talking now for Europe, a bit of what I call the approach of, Mario Draghi in the monetary crisis, whatever it takes. So you have these investors, you have the public policy that wants this. So bring this together, and whatever it takes, make it happen. Because we cannot wait. We have no time to waste for decarbonizing these hard to abate sectors, because otherwise we will have no chance of achieving the 2050 targets. IEA has made the calculation. So we're talking at Europe, 10 million tons of green hydrogen. Well, for the world, the calculation is 40 million tons, as the World Energy Outlook in IEA has made clear. So we need 30 million tons elsewhere of low carbon and or green hydrogen, and 10 million tons at least in Europe.
Thank you, Noé. By the way, for our audience, especially our non-European audience, there has been, I would encourage everyone to look up the European Hydrogen Backbone Project, which brings together 15 gas TSOs across Europe. with a plan of 23,000 kilometers. There's a nice map that goes with it of hydrogen dedicated pipes. Storage capacity, we haven't talked about it. It's absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
We're talking about the equivalent of millions of batteries, nothing, I mean, storing not few hours, but months of energy in existing salt caverns and aquifers. That's something which is just should be known, much more known, that it's an industry initiative, which is really a pan-European initiative and which is fundamental because it's going to make things happen.
We should make it happen. Absolutely, I completely agree.
Sunita, you have been instrumental in bringing together people from around the world, gathering and speaking about hydrogen. You've been instrumental in the organization of the first IEA summit, which happened in Japan last year, 2 years ago now, and scaling is also bringing different countries, not just one region like like Europe or the US. How do you see global cooperation shaping up on this issue? Because obviously it's not just, we have, by the way, a number of viewers from South America, from Asia and other places. How do you see this thing shaping up at a global level?
Yeah, thank you, Thierry. And that's a really great question. And I would say that we're already seeing so much collaboration. Again, personally engaged the last 2 decades. But I think what now we're seeing, to be honest, many different organizations that are cropping up, a lot of new players in hydrogen. And so I think coordination, having a very cohesive, so we're all, on the same boat in the same river, rowing in the same direction, not just, many different boats in different rivers. So I think that sort of coordinated strategy and the hydrogen energy ministerial, for instance, that you mentioned, the global action agenda that was launched with, many ministers, many countries, agreeing to that, sending, again, high-level aspirational targets, signaling to the investment community the commitment, governments, private sector, that 10-10-10, in case the audience is not familiar, 10 million fuel cell systems, 10,000 stations in 10 years. And so again, and then concrete actions under that. And again, all the clean energy ministerial that was launched, mission innovation, of course, IPHE was one of the first in 2003, as you mentioned, and IEA, of course, longstanding, IRENA's getting into it. There's so many. And so I think the key is one of the highest priorities when we voted at the last IPHE meeting, I think that was when I was still chair, and now Noe's the chair of IPHE, and we're vice chair along with Japan, was one of the highest or 2 high priorities. One was regulations, codes and standards, harmonization, safety, harmonization of codes and standards. Again, we can't have one nozzle that's used in one country, another than another country in terms of fueling, very limited supply chain, harmonization. Those protocols was one high priority. And then the other highest priority that was voted on in Korea was facilitating international trade. So coming up with an analytical framework, again, not regulating or coming up with specific mandates, but how do we actually account for the greenhouse gas emissions for these different ways of producing hydrogen? Whether you use colors or not, green, blue, or, basically if you have SMR, most of the hydrogen, C-methane reforming with CCS, green hydrogen, what's the source of that hydrogen, nuclear hydrogen, and what are the boundary conditions? How do we actually account? Because to be honest, even now, there's such a wide range if you actually look up how much CO2 is actually produced for each pathway. And so having all these countries working together with all the experts, really coordinating on that international level on what's the right methodology, agreeing on that, so that, again, with the private sector, we have that coordinated, cohesive landscape, that framework. So that's just one example. And then also others like the Global Center for Hydrogen Safety, and there are other, coordinating on safety training, certifications, all of that also is something that was considered a very high priority that we're coming in to, help facilitate and support the industry needs. So I think, I think of we have different pieces of the puzzle to fall into place, but they're not going to just fall into place. I think we have to very carefully put them together piece by piece. And those are just a few examples of the pieces. And then, sharing information, business cases, as we get these big projects, and you were talking about some of your plans, how do we, not reinvent the wheel? How do we, learn from each other's approaches and strategies? And so that, again, is one example of what we're doing, for instance, with Noe and IPHE and others. So I'll pause there, but I think, there's huge opportunity. And now's the time to, really get, put pen to paper and then launch those projects. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sunita. Noe, we have a number of questions from the audience regarding two subjects. I'd like you to address those two subjects. One is the European programs, incentives, and what is behind that. We've talked about the value chain, and obviously all this is now being pushed by government support. There are a number of instruments, the IPHE and other. Maybe it would be interesting for you to touch on that. And we have some people who are doubtful. If I see in the audience who are saying, how come those oil and gas infrastructure people would be willing to relinquish natural gas and go for hydrogen? And obviously, this interesting thing that you mentioned about the Hassouni and this transmission. What is behind the strategy of a Hassouni or other guys who are transforming their natural gas facilities to hydrogen? You could as well, by the way, talk as well about the coal-fired plants, which are right now being transformed into hydrogen-fired plants. One of them, by the way, in the US, in Utah, right now, major project, the IPHE project, very interesting of having this conversion. So maybe if you can address these two points for our audience.
Yes, with pleasure, Thierry. But first, let me just say very quickly. I fully endorse what Sunita was saying about, of course, this high priority that we have at the global scale for agreeing on the methodology of calculating a carbon footprint of hydrogen production. Because if we want to build this global trade system, if we want to have clean hydrogen as a new global commodity, and that's what you were alluding to also, Thierry, earlier in your introduction, then we really need this. So it's very urgent, and so we are working on this as IPHE, and we hope that during this year we can achieve an international consensus on that, because on the basis of that we can start really reliable certification schemes that can have global trading between continents on this. Now to your questions. I think the first question was, about, of course, there are a lot of European schemes that are now being that are there, but they need to be ready to support these ambitions on clean hydrogen. So the real challenge is going to be, how do we make these programs, and I'm talking, for instance, about, I don't even know all of them, the Innovation Fund, the the Connect Europe facilities, etc. But we need all of these facilities that are already in place for the energy transition to really open up and to have maximize the way that they can help and facilitate the scaling up of clean hydrogen. That is the real challenge, and that is not going to be an easy one, I can tell you. This is what Jorgo was already alluding to. We need relaxation of state aid rules, for instance. So this all takes a lot of time, but we don't have time. This is a little bit the challenge. But Jorgo is working on this, so I'm counting on him that he can help us make this work, because we need it all very, very fast. Everything needs to be in place this year, because we need, of course, companies to be able to make final investment decision on these big projects in 2023, 2022, 2024. So this is number one. Number two, what about these gas and oil companies? Yes, of course, it is that's the big transition that we are in the middle of. So you have to see it this way. That's how I look at it. Gas, of course, all these gas pipelines are now still major, of course, all in use for the transportation of gas. But hey, what's the problem with gas? Is that we don't, there is no future for gas ultimately in 2050. In 2050, we need to be net zero emissions. Now, how is that going to work? And I always challenge, people that ask this kind of question and say, what do you think? You think we are going to be continuing to use and transport fossil fuels until 2049, and then in 1 year we are going to completely transform to net zero emissions? No, of course not. So we will have a path in which gas pipelines will be gradually repurposed. And as I said, in the Netherlands, we have so much capacity. We are in a unique opportunity. We have a unique opportunity. We can immediately in the next 5 years already have gigawatt scale of transportation because we have kind of overcapacity. And if people complain about it, then I tell them, okay, what do you want them to do otherwise, these companies? You want them to decommission these, to not use them anymore, and then who is going to pay for that ultimately? Society is going to pay the cost of decommissioning, and then we will have to build new pipelines once we discover that we need transportation long distance, and you will have to pay for that as well. So you want to pay twice or you want to pay once? So this is kind of the way that you see, and there is going to be a gradual, the gas transportation is going to go down and the hydrogen transportation is going to go up, and there will be combinations in parts of Europe and elsewhere. Australia is doing it, Canada. We will also see, of course, blending of clean hydrogen with gas as a transition measure again. But I say at the end, 2050, guys, we will have to get use of everything. We have to get rid of everything, all the fossil fuels at the end of the day.
Thank you, Noé. We have several questions around that, and that I would call that the de-stranding phenomenon. Everyone's talking about stranded assets, oil and gas fields and the rest. Now, the good news is with hydrogen, and we are seeing it, and what you're just saying about the gas transmission is a perfect example. We can see it as well with steel making, which is now a very, very big emitter. And then if it goes to DRI, direct reduced iron, and then it can be a fully sustainable, full-fledged growth industry. Same thing with fertilizers, with green ammonia. Same thing with power to gas to power. We have a question on that. Does it make sense to go for power to gas to power? And the answer is very simple. If you have very cheap power, such as, for instance, solar that supplies the IPHE project in Utah, then it makes sense. It makes sense because you can have that fully dispatchable power that everyone is after with a zero carbon profile. Sunita, we have another question, which is interesting, which is, again, a geopolitical question. People are saying today, 90% of the world, 90% of countries, that does not include the US, but that includes nearly every European country, is dependent on fossil fuel imports, especially oil and gas, which is obviously an issue, which gives you a form of vulnerability to supply. We have a question saying, what about hydrogen? Can hydrogen be a pathway for many countries to energy self-sufficiency? Not that we don't need to, again, to trade the product, but at least to produce some of it locally or in some places, but certainly not depend on just a handful of countries, because the issue is today not necessarily producing locally hydrogen, but certainly producing in more countries than where we produce today oil and gas. Instead of 10 to 20 countries, maybe 100 or 150. Do you think this scattering, if I may say, of hydrogen production can help address this energy security and energy, if I may use that word, peace approach by making this a very critical source of energy more available to a wider number of countries?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, Thierry, and for some of the audience that might not be familiar with the US program, we actually started our program in the 1970s when DOE was formed during the first oil embargo. So that was when there were long lines. There was, it was all about energy security and independence of petroleum. So again, that was a long time ago. So that's one of the main advantages with hydrogen, the versatility. And many people call it the Swiss Army knife of energy, because you can produce it from diverse domestic resources, really in any region. So again, you can make it from, fossil fuels with CCS, bio-derived biomass. You can make it from, nuclear, split water with renewables, solar, wind, any resource. And so again, one of the big areas we, started looking at this, countries are, what's the resource availability, the local, regional resource availability? Where does it make most sense? In some cases, will be large, and also water. If you're doing water splitting or electrolysis, how do you optimize that system so you can produce it regionally? In some cases, very large scale transport. We in the U.S. have over 1,600 miles, over 3,000 kilometers of pipeline already. The world's largest geological storage cavern, 3 major, caverns, gigawatt hours. So I think, there it's going to be a combination of, if we really want to ramp up quickly, a combination of large scale central production, pipeline distribution. If we're talking about high energy density needs, then it'll be liquefaction. The other is really converting it to a molecule. So, like a liquid carrier or, ammonia, for instance, higher energy density. Again, hydrogen has the highest energy content by mass. That's why NASA used it in the space program. 3 times higher than gasoline, than conventional fuels like natural gas. But by volume, it's hard to store. So that's why there's also interest in going to other carriers. Again, hydrogen is a carrier; it's not a primary source. But to the question, that's partly why I think we're seeing so much interest, because again, you can produce it domestically regardless of the region. But the question is, from a global scale, if we're going to get to our deep decarbonization goals, not all regions. Now, some regions, right, Japan, Korea, they're importing over 95% of their energy. So if you don't have regions that can easily be and cost effectively be converted to, and also sustainably, because again, it's from the large ecological perspective, it needs to be sustainable. And if you can't produce the total amount that you need, there's still going to be some sort of trade and import and export market. And so it's a very complex issue, but that's why I think, it's really important to recognize the main drivers. And I think from the US perspective, transportation, again, it's hydrogen can apply to multiple sectors, but it's the largest emitter now here in the US in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, because the power industry has been, gradually getting cleaner. It's also the second largest expense in the US for Americans, the cost, just transportation after housing costs. And so going back to your question on infrastructure, this is not really talked about as much. I think the pipelines, we're working on materials compatibility, all that I think is well known, but the actual if we're talking about, for instance, trucks and heavy duty transport, there isn't as much experience in terms of the infrastructure, the cost of the stations. We're talking about large, many tons per day, liquids infrastructure. So again, cost, getting that cost down for the entire value chain, not just the production piece, but that whole, transport, storage, and also the components. So carbon fiber tanks, for instance, a lot of independent assessment here. Even if we're at like $20 a kilowatt hour, even if we get to scale, we still need to cut the cost in half. And these components, high tensile strength carbon fiber is not really available, and the precursor cost is high. So there's still a lot of detail that needs to be worked out on the infrastructure side. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you, Sunita. Noe, there is a last subject which I'd like to touch. There is a very important German word that Jorgo loves, and is not there to. It's sector coupling. It doesn't mean anything for people, but it says something very strong, very important. Hydrogen is not an isolated thing. It is part of a system. Taking a systemic approach where you have power, heat, transportation, and molecules and electrons all these things need to be an energy system. That energy systems needs to solve, to address the energy trilemma of energy security. We discussed that. That's the most important thing ahead of everything. Second one is energy affordability. And the third one, obviously, is a very important one, is decarbonization. What can you tell us about this sector coupling thing? And also another dimension that we haven't mentioned to it is the digital dimension. When we talk about, and this is another technology dimension, let's call it smart hydrogen. When you want to have a real-time tracing, we mentioned that the issue of traceability of those electrons and molecules, and how digital technologies can help to do that. Where do you see the systemic approach of sector coupling on the one side, and these digital infrastructures that need to match that deployment to solve basically the energy trilemma?
Well, again, a great question, Thierry. I think indeed that hydrogen is, I like this word that Sunita uses always, of enabler. This is enabling us indeed to make this work, this sector coupling and the sector integration. But to be honest, Thierry, I think we talk a lot about it, especially in Europe, but we are really at the beginning yet. And I'm saying that also from my experience in, as a policymaker earlier in the Netherlands, because I see that still we are very much working in silos. The electricity system, the electricity people, they have their own transmission system operator. We have the gas side, we have the gas system operator. And yes, they are talking more to each other than ever before. In the Netherlands, even they produce a joint outlook on the infrastructure needs in 2050. And we are starting to do this actually now at the European level. But this is not the same yet, because for me, the critical test will be for real sector integration is that you look at the energy system as a whole, and you also base your investment decisions on that. So to give you a very concrete example, which plays very much in, you may know this other project of the North Sea Wind Power Hub, which is in the North Sea, where the Netherlands, together with Germany and Denmark, is planning big gigawatt scale of wind offshore. Are you going to transport those gigawatts of new wind offshore production in we are talking about the 2030s then? Are you going to transport it through electricity transmission lines that you have to build? You will have to build new ones. They are very expensive. And is it the most efficient way to do it? Or are you partly going to use, again, existing gas pipelines that are no longer being used for gas transportation? And are you going to produce partly green hydrogen offshore on those artificial islands, and then transport the green hydrogen through the gas pipelines offshore? So what you would like is an integrated decision-making on this based on the relative costs and the pros and the cons and benefits of that. Sorry, we're running out of time.
Thank you, Noé. It's perfect. I think you made the conclusion. The answer to scaling is a question. How do we make it happen? How do we involve? I'd like to give big thanks to all our speakers today, Dr. Sunita Satyapal, Noé van Hulst, and our Yorgo Chatzimarkakis. And thank you again to our audience. I think we were about 700 people at the highest point. It's a very, very rewarding thing. This is all very promising for what we have to do. Over to you, Luc.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Thierry's comments, and thank you, of course, everyone for tuning in. Just incredible numbers. We thought maybe webinar fatigue might be a thing, but hey, I think we bucked that trend today. It's been a real pleasure having these speakers and an honor for us at Reuters. Do stay tuned in. If anyone has any suggestions for content or would like to partner with Reuters, do get in touch. My email is luke.brett@thomsonreuters.com. Thanks again for our panelists. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the day wherever we are in the world. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.